Traditionally, in the Theosophical Society, we say that there are three pillars for the practice: study, meditation, and service. It is a good model. I think there are some more elements that are not mentioned there, but that is a good foundation to see that the Theosophical practice is quite holistic. So we are going to explore these three and some other elements that you can find in the Theosophical literature. Let us start with Theosophical study. There are different, let's say, dimensions of study and different aims. So according to where we are at, what we seek from the study is different. The first dimension of study, so to say, is the obvious one, the study of books. But that is not the only thing implied when we say study. There is another dimension that is the study of life and ourselves. So it's not only books, and we are going to see both things. So the study of books is what we normally understand when we say study, and we are going to explore it to some degree of detail. Then there are several purposes for the study, and this from a theosophical point of view. One is to provide a new perspective of life. And normally we are raised with a perspective of life that is good to be successful in the world, but it's not necessarily conducive to a spiritual life. The way our current society conceives life is based on competition, consumerism, acquisition, all these things that when we come to try to live in a spiritual way, maybe in the way. Not necessarily because we cannot, if we are spiritual, we cannot be in a career or we cannot have things. All that is compatible. The problem is the background, how we understand our relationship to objects or a career or things like this. So the first aim in the study is to offer us a different perspective that will allow us to keep on living the life that we are living, but now turn that life into a spiritual practice because we are considering life in a different way. Then another aim of the study is to produce a transformation. If we study in the right way, the very fact of putting our minds in this kind of subjects will produce a transformation. If we study just as we may read a novel, then the effect is not going to be very marked. But if we study in a way that we are going to explore, then that very fact will start a transformation. Another aim of the study is to generate a foundation for what traditionally in Theosophy we call occultism, which is not the same meaning as the one that the word has today for the most part. When the Theosophical Society was founded, in the West we knew very little, next to nothing, about yoga or a spiritual path. So what the word that Blavatsky and the early Theosophists used to use for the idea of a spiritual path was occultism. Occult comes from hidden, and the occult path is that path in which we are trying to reveal or to perceive that which is hidden, which is the true nature of the universe, the true nature of ourselves. But in the advanced aspects of this path, the person begins to be able to become a co-worker of nature, begins to be able to help in the cosmic evolution. And for that, there is a certain technical knowledge that is needed. It's more or less like a scientist, but a scientist of the psyche and the spiritual worlds. And part of the purpose of the study is to generate certain foundations of knowledge which are retained by the soul, and so that when the soul is mature enough to begin this aspect of the spiritual life, there is already a foundation. For example, you see that some people come to the Theosophical Society and they hear all these teachings, and in them there is this recognition of a truth that they knew but they didn't remember. But when you hear the teachings, you say, yes, I always knew that, I always felt that. That is because that knowledge was already acquired in previous lifetime, and now we are just refreshing our knowledge, bringing that knowledge that was in our soul down to the brain, let's say. The same happens with the occult teachings. They may not be all that useful, some aspect of these teachings to us right now, but if we learn the basic principles of the occult aspect of life, when we are ready to begin that path, all that knowledge will be there. Otherwise, the person will have to spend, once the soul is mature enough, it will have to spend a couple of lifetimes just learning the theory before that person can become a co-worker of nature. So that is also one of the aims of the study. Some people say, why should I study these things, that seem to be removed? Well, it may not be absolutely necessary right now, but if you do, that will help you in the future at that level. And then another aim of the study is to learn how to tread, how to, as we normally say, tread the path, how to apply these teachings for a transformation in your life. So we are going to explore a couple of these aims. We don't have time to explore all of them, but the ones that are more directly useful for the stage of development that most of us are. And then, of course, as I said, there is also the study of life and oneself that we are going to see also.
Requisites for wisdom. The quality of wisdom ever was and will be yet for a long time denied to him who seeks the wealth of the mind for its own sake. Mahatma K.H. Men who seek after knowledge until they weary themselves to death, but even they do not feel very impatient to help their neighbor with their knowledge. It is he alone who has the love of humanity at heart, who is capable of grasping thoroughly the idea of a regenerating, practical brotherhood, who is entitled to the possession of our secrets. Mahatma M.
So there are here 2 points that have to do with certain requisites for us to acquire wisdom. I mean, we can acquire knowledge. There are also some requisites. We need to have a relatively intellectual mind. You have to be able to spend time studying and memorizing, and then you can acquire knowledge. Now, if that knowledge is going to awaken this inner wisdom that we are going that we are talking about, something else is needed. No matter how much knowledge you accumulate, that knowledge will never transform into wisdom unless there are certain requisites. And the reason is I think, clear. If wisdom comes from a state of consciousness in which we are closer to our divine nature, and therefore further away from the idea that I am this particular fragment, then to attain that state of consciousness, we have to have the right motivation. If I'm accumulating information because I, as a fragment, want to be wiser, to have, to be admired, or whatever the fragment may want, that very attitude that is centered in the fragment is an obstacle to transcend that false idea that I am this fragment. So, since wisdom can come only when I transcend that, if I study with a self-centered attitude, I may become very knowledgeable, but I'm not going to become wise. So this is why Mahatma K.H. says the quality of wisdom is denied for those who seek knowledge for themselves, for their minds. And the same with what Mahatma M says, another of the teachers, Moria, another of the teachers of Madame Blavatsky, He says that most people, they seek to gain knowledge not because they want to help others. They seek knowledge for their own sake, and then they not only they cannot reach the state of divine wisdom, but also they are beyond the help or the attention of the masters. As we are going to see, the masters are the masters of wisdom. Michelle is going to talk about their nature and work in one of her talks. But the masters of wisdom are always trying to help humanity, to inspire people that are trying to do something for the good of humanity. This person may be a householder, a politician, a scientist, a theosophist, whoever is trying to do something to help humanity in whatever place that person is. The masters are constantly liberating good influences, trying to inspire the best in each person. So a person that is trying to help has this extra help from these masters. In Buddhism they call them bodhisattvas, for example. In Hinduism are dervishes, etc. So what the master is saying there, we will never help a person that is trying to gather knowledge for personal reasons. But those who are trying to help humanity, they will receive our help and maybe realize things that by themselves it would have taken them far longer. They liberate influences, and if we are receptive, then we can realize some things that would be more difficult otherwise.
The conditioned mind. A man can only think in his worn grooves, and unless he has the courage to fill up these and make new ones for himself, he must perforce travel on the old lines. Mahatma K.H.
So in order to learn, first we have to unlearn whatever is not in tune with that new perspective of life. And that is a difficulty. We are not like a whiteboard ready to be written on a new perspective of life. We come to Theosophy or to any particular philosophy with a particular background that for a long time taints whatever we are receiving. So if we have a tendency to perceive the deity in a personal way, and we come to a description that is more impersonal, for the most part it takes years to even realize that we are still looking at the impersonal deity in a personal way. Or let me give you a different example that may be more clear. When talking about karma, because we are raised with the idea of a God that imparts justice and punishes the evildoer and rewards the people who are doing good, we look at karma in a very similar way. We just exchange the name, and we don't say it's God punishing you, it's karma punishing you, it's karma rewarding you. And we don't realize that karma works in a completely different way. There is no sense of rewarding or punishing. Whatever we call bad karma, which is normally what is unpleasant to us, we tend to think this is happening to us because we did something wrong, and now this is the natural punishment from the divine justice. That is a very, I would say, a very Christian view of karma. Sometimes an example to how you can see this in a different way, sometimes I give. For example, if you are a sport person, let's say you play tennis, and your aim is to become a good player that can hit the ball in all the different ways. But you neglect to practice one particular way of hitting the ball. So you neglect that, and then your trainer comes and one day tells you, okay, because you have not practiced this, all day you will have to practice this particular way of hitting the ball. You wouldn't say that the trainer is punishing you because you neglected to do something in the past. Of course, you have to do this because of what you neglected to do in the past. But it's not a punishment. It is actually something necessary for you to become a great tennis player. So karma, if karma brings something that is difficult to you, it is true that this is because you neglected to do something in the past or you didn't do it in the right way, if we want to use right and wrong. And now you have to face this challenging situation, but it has nothing to do with punishment. Now, because we have these ideas of punishment and reward, we unconsciously look at karma in the same way. So what the master is saying here is that it's very important in order to understand the esoteric view of life, to unlearn all these things that we have absorbed in our education. And that takes time, and it's natural that will take time. And when we study, what is important is that when we study, we have to refrain from trying to look in the study a way to reinforce the things that we already know. If you look, when we read a book, we tend to underline the sentences. If you look at what sentences you underline, many times are those sentences that are reaffirming what we already know. We say, oh yes, I agree with this, and we underline it. And we unconsciously, we go through a selection where we are looking for in the text for those things that are saying the same thing that we already know, and the things that are challenging, that are questioning our way, we tend to let it go. We don't pay special attention to that, or we say, I don't agree with this. So the study has to be such that if you trust the author, you take the challenges that the author is bringing you. It doesn't mean that you will accept blindly whatever the author says, but we need to be aware, why am I accepting this? Why am I rejecting this? And trying to see if in the things that we don't agree with the author, if there is a truth there. So by means of this intelligent study, not a study where we are trying to bring comfort, reaffirmation, validation, but the study in which we want to discover, then all these different conditionings begin to be evident to us. And then we can start breaking those conditionings. So this is an important part, to work with the conditioned mind and to uncondition it.
A new perspective of life. The student must first grasp the subject intellectually before he can hope to realize his aspirations. Damodar Mahalankar. Experience must be gained of every evil as good passion mentally and overcome in thought by reflection. Love and longing for higher things on a spiritual plane will thus leave no room for the lower animal longings. HPB.
So there are 2 points here that I think are important with the study. The first one, we naturally want to start doing. Many people come to the TS and they ask, okay, what technique of meditation should I use? What practice should I use? The problem is that if we don't know where we have to go, we may find means to go very fast, to run or to get a car and go very fast. But if we are going in the wrong direction, the faster we go, the further we are going away from the goal that we should follow. Before we can do anything, we have to make sure that we know what direction we have to go. This is present in many traditions. In Buddhism, in the Eightfold Path that the Buddha recommended, the first of all these steps is right view. If you don't have the right view, whatever you do will be ineffective or less effective than it could, because the view is very important in spirituality. As I said yesterday, spirituality is not a question of following techniques. Techniques may help if we have the right view, but it's not just following a recipe like we may if we are cooking or being in a lab doing some experiment. Spirituality is not so much a world of action, is a world of intention. Whatever you attempt to do, that will come to you. So if you are meditating for a self-centered purpose, you will get a self-centered result. If you are applying the same technique of meditation for an impersonal object or aim, you will attain an impersonal aim. So in spirituality, the right view is very important. So Damodar says, before we can really start to practice, we need to have, at least to some degree, a right view of things. And by right view, I don't mean in a judgmental way. You know, we all are in this process of exploration. It's not that what you say or what I'm saying is right. The right view is the best view that we can attain at that moment. It's never the absolute right view, but it's the best that we can attain. And that will open up to another right view that may be closer to the truth. And then the second aspect, what HPV says there, is that by beginning to pay attention to spiritual subjects, to spiritual aims, even if before we start trying to practice anything, that very act of directing our minds from the way in which we normally live, that is all based around ourselves, maybe our family, our bodily pleasure, our psychological pleasure, that stimulates one particular kind of mind. But when we start paying attention to these subjects that are not based on the personality, that in itself begins to produce a certain transformation. So this is why she says, by contemplating higher things, then a transformation may happen. And this is the first aim in the study, to give us a new perspective of life and to begin to produce this transformation that we are going to explore.
How am I to give expression to ideas for which you have as yet no language? The finer and more susceptible heads get more than others do, and even when they get a little extra dose, it is lost for want of words and images to fix the floating ideas. Mahatma K.H.
So in understanding, there are two elements. One is the direct perception of something. The other is the ability of the mind to turn it into an idea. At the mental level, unless we can generate an idea, we cannot retain it. The formless insight, the moment of understanding, is more important than the image that we can create out of that. But when there is an insight of understanding, if the mind is not able to turn it into an idea, that understanding many times gets lost to the lower consciousness. So maybe it happened to you that sometimes you see something and you can't quite put your finger on it. It's a feeling of understanding, but there is no clarity in your mind as to what that understanding is. That is a preliminary state. Even if you cannot really grasp at the intellectual level what you are understanding that comes from beyond the mind, it is a stage in the process. Eventually the insight will become clearer and clearer. But especially because we want to acquire knowledge so that we can help others, we need to be able to retain these insights. And the way to retain these insights is to train the mind to be able to be molded by that insight and get a clear idea. So that is what the master is saying there to Sinet, who was one of the people who received letters from them in the early years of the Theosophical Society. The master said, I could try to point out certain things to you, but unless in your mind you have the ability to generate the idea, it will go over your head. And this is always the case. You know, the intellectual level of understanding is only one level in the whole process. It's not the most important one. But it is important, especially if we are going to communicate our understanding. So what the study does is to train the lower mind so that it can receive and hold the insights that will come from your higher nature. And that is another aim of the study, to give you these tools and this material. So now let's see the aspect of transformation of the mind.
Transformation. The brain is the instrument of waking consciousness, and every conscious mental picture formed means change and destruction of the atoms of the brain. Ordinary intellectual activity moves on well-beaten paths in the brain and does not compel sudden adjustments and destructions in its substance. But this new kind of mental effort calls for something very different, the carving out of new brain paths, the ranking in different order of the little brain lives. If forced injudiciously, it may do serious physical harm to the brain, HPV.
So HPV was trying to explain something that at a time where in physiology we didn't know almost anything about neurons and the synapses and the neural pathways that we generate. So she was trying to explain something that she perceived, as we saw in higher states of consciousness, to explain it with a language that wasn't there. But basically, we know today that how our perception generates a particular pathways in our brain that are fitted to bring to our brain that particular kind of perception. So if we are people who start working in mathematics, our brain will be reshaped little by little so that we can perceive this particular field in a clearer and clearer way. Same with art or with any other field. So Blavatsky says that in the same way, in order to be able to perceive this hidden view of life, this occult view of life, the brain has to be reshaped, has to be arranged in a different way so that that perception can be retained at the level of the mental, the brain consciousness, let's say. So Blavatsky says, by reading these kind of subjects, you begin to generate in your brain the pathways that you need so that the brain can become a receptacle of these kind of things. So Krishnamurti used to talk about the mutation in the brain that is necessary, and that the insights that you can have now and then, they produce a rearrangement in the brain. So even at the physical level, we need to reshape our brain. If our mind is constantly paying attention to the material aspect of life, our mind may be very good to deal with those things, but as soon as we start talking about unity and all the spiritual topics, the brain itself will be unreceptive. So one of the aims of the study is to start generating a brain that can perceive these ideas.
Annie Besant tells us, until the lower or concrete mind is developed, the intellect, the higher mind, cannot find its full evolution. Now the one condition of progress is complete, unfettered liberty of thought. That is a lesson that we all need to learn.
So in order to be able, you have some mystics in the history of mysticism in different traditions that were very skillful in articulating their insights, and they became great teachers of others. In Christian tradition, Meister Eckhart or Saint John of the Cross, or some others. Then you have some mystics that were completely unable to express their insights, and for the most part, we don't even know about them because they didn't teach, and they were more private people that were just unable. They had these insights, but their lower mind was not developed or trained to be able to express these insights. And I suppose that basically for that mystic in particular, whether the mind can articulate this or not doesn't make much difference. But for the rest of humanity, it does, because we learn from those who are able to articulate all this. So if you are going to help people around you, it is important that you become able to articulate these things. And there are some other mystics that are in between, and maybe they try to express their insights with poetry or some kind of art. So it is important to develop what we call the lower mind, our everyday mind, in a way that it will be able to express these things. But again, try not to forget that the development of the lower mind is a means for something higher. Many times we forget that, and we get lost in just the lower mind, in accumulating knowledge and in concentrating on that aspect of the mind.
She also says the object you must remember of all our teachings is not to give facts to memorize, as is done in the case of ordinary knowledge, but to evolve in yourself the faculties which will enable you to understand and grasp facts and arrange them in their proper place.
So in both quotes, in the first one she talks about the condition for the evolution of the mind is freedom of thought. And then she talks about when we study Theosophy, we don't want just to memorize how karma works, what reincarnation is. What we want is to stimulate thinking, to stimulate reflection. We want to challenge ourselves. If you read a concept that is difficult to grasp, do not just stay there, either trying to memorize the concept or just leaving the concept aside, but stop there and try to picture that concept. In the Secret Doctrine, Blavatsky describes the absolute, an omnipresent, principle on which all speculation is impossible. You can memorize all the words and give a lecture and describe the absolute, and that is useless as a real theosophical study. It may be more or less useful just because you can transmit that, and maybe somebody in the audience will do the work and benefit from it. But what we want is stop there and try to picture what the author is saying. Even if you can't, make the effort. What we want with the study is that it is a stimulation for your own thinking. What do you think about? Why? Do you perceive it in a different way? Why? Is it just conditioning? Is it that you are seeing another aspect? Is it that you are not seeing what the author says? So the study is more a training more than the accumulation of knowledge. Unfortunately, in the way we are educated, study is just accumulating knowledge. And again, we come to Theosophy with the same attitude. So what Besant and all the Theosophical leaders say is that we need to start to use study as a way of training our mind to get our own perceptions.
A man may read much, but his mental growth will be in proportion to the amount of thought that he expends in his reading. Unless he takes up the thought and works on it himself, its value to him will be small and passing. If we are in earnest in the culture of our minds, we should daily spend an hour in the study of some serious and weighty book, and reading for 5 minutes, we should think for 10, and so on through the hour. The usual way is to read quickly for the hour and then put away the book until the next hour comes for reading. Hence, people grow very slowly in thought power.
Of course, thinking is not the ultimate aim of the study, but it's an important part of the process, and we are going to see also the whatever is beyond thinking. But this conscious pondering over the teachings is essential. So as Annie Besant says there, when you go to read, don't try to read as much as you can, because that will lead you to read fast. Go to read and remember that what is important is the pondering over that can come out of it. If the book is kind of superficial, there will be probably little room for you to think. But if you read deeper books, and most of the theosophical literature is quite deep, then you can use these books in this way. So the author says something, pause, stay with that concept, try to see what it really means, It doesn't matter if you, in the whole hour, you read one page. Actually, if you do that, that is great. If you read one page because you were pondering over it. So that is what we want in the study, not just to read and accumulate information that is not processed.
And just to add, the other thing I learned going to one of my son's English classes is the teacher showed a quote where he mentioned that writing is concentrated thinking. So if we're reading, we're pondering, and then we're taking notes that are simply for ourselves, it's increasing that thinking, it's focusing it on what we do. And a lot of times when we write, we have other ideas come to us.
Yeah, Annie Besant even suggests that kind of exercise. She says, read one part that is a deep, paragraph about a deep concept, then put the book aside and write in your words what you understood from that, then go back to the book and read and see how much you really understood. Because this happens very often, that we think we understand what the author is saying, but actually we are understanding something completely different because of the conditioning and all the things that we were talking about. So if you write it down and then you compare, you can see how good your understanding was. So if you take study as a form of training, you can do this. Of course, not with every sentence. Some parts are fairly obvious and you don't need to do that. But there are books in the Theosophical literature that really lend to this kind of treatment. If you read, of course, The Secret Doctrine or the Mahatma Letters or Annie Besant's Study in Consciousness, or there are many others in which you can use it in this way. And that is actually not only giving you information, it's producing a transformation in yourself.
And HPB talks about making your own diagrams. Read what she says, look at the diagrams are there, and make your own. So along with the writing, you're making pictures, and they're your pictures to move and improve from. When we begin to teach a subject, we try to present it in a clear form. That is the modern way of teaching. It makes people rather lazy because too much is done for them. And the result is that the memory is very much more and the reasoning much less exercised than they ought to be. The old ways are different. The teacher came along, threw one great truth to his pupils and said, go and think about it. In the Eastern books, you do not get a clear presentment of a doctrine as a whole. It is scattered over the books. In the old days, men had to work out results, so they grew into great thinkers because they exercised their minds. But the modern student has not the patience and industry required for the task. And Besant.
So this is very interesting, and I always feel, it is true, even in the TS, we try to present the subjects in as clear a way as possible. And that is good from a certain point of view, but it's also a disservice in the sense that we are doing what Annie Besant is saying here that we shouldn't do. The Secret Doctrine is a book that is written exactly in the way that Annie Besant talks about, like in the old days. If you want to follow some subject in the Secret Doctrine, you have to go through the whole book and follow that and try to connect the pieces that are written in different contexts. And that really, we should go to the Secret Doctrine, which is what Blavatsky said. I think I put one of those quotes. We should go to the Secret Doctrine, not to read it from cover to cover as any book, or not even to try to get a clear picture of something. We should go to the Secret Doctrine as an intellectual gym, a place where you go to train yourself, follow the threads, bring together statements that seem contradictory, try to see how they fit together or why they don't. This is the way, according to Annie Besant, that the study was done in the past. But today we are too busy, we are too focused on results. If after an hour of study where all you did was to struggle, you think that you wasted your time. If you end up the hour and you think that you understood many things, then you are happy and you think that it was a successful session. So our concepts are not really in accordance to the occult aspect of the spiritual life. What we want in the spiritual training is to elicit, to awaken inner faculties, not to produce these superficial results that are nice and good for the personal self, but they are not really deep.
Okay, and if I could just add, the other thing is, for me to start studying, since I didn't have a background in academics, the symbology or the words, to go right to Blavatsky and start reading, that was impossible. So I started with Leadbeater and Annie Besant and things like that, Rohit Mehta, that I could digest a little better. And then once I got to reading Blavatsky, then I understood a little more of the terminology or the symbology she was using, or the all over the place-ness that she is, so it was easier to go there.
Yes, everything has its process. I think that for most people, the better way to go is to start with the authors that present clear pictures. But eventually we want to move beyond that. As we get a certain foundation, then we want to start trying to put our mind in this kind of effort as opposed to just trying to gather knowledge.
Come to the secret doctrine without any hope of getting the final truth of existence from it, or with any idea other than seeing how far it may lead towards the truth. See and study a means of exercising and developing the mind never touched by other studies. HPB.
I like very much the secret doctrine, but I think that its value is not so much in the information that is there. If tomorrow Blavatsky would manifest and say everything I wrote in the secret doctrine is not factually true, I would still study the secret doctrine, because I don't think that the importance there is that there were 7 root races. Suppose Blavatsky comes and says, there were 6. What's the difference? Oh no, there were 9. There is no purpose in that. Or if you say the 3 logoi, and then she comes and says, well, there are actually 4. What's the difference? That doesn't really matter to me. What I think
it does. That would make me crazy. I would say, what do you mean? I just wasted all this time. I have to remember. So
there is, of course, an aspect of we trust that what Blavatsky wrote there has some as much truth as it is possible in writing, but to me that is a secondary aspect of the book. What is more important is, as Blavatsky says there, how it may lead us to truth, because in the effort to understand the things that Blavatsky is saying there, we are pushing into that higher nature of ourselves that is the only one that can understand these things. So because the things that Blavatsky talks about are abstract, only the abstract spiritual mind can understand it. So in our effort to understand it, we are stimulating the spiritual mind. So even if the concept in itself is not factual, the effort that it produces in you, stimulates in you, is what is more important. So I think we should always keep that in mind. And if there are different interpretations of the secret doctrine, that's perfectly fine. That is not the most important part. Did you do your work? Then that's great. Did I do the work? Then that's great, even if we came to different conclusions. Ideas are very secondary when you compare it to the perception that you can get.
And I think one of the clues in the secret doctrine that you know that it's not concrete is when she says per se or so to say. Mm-hmm. So because I've made diagrams, think I got the concept down, and I'll show Pablo and talk to him, and I'll say, okay, is this it? He'll say, yeah, per se. And I know that there's little nuances that, a couple months down the road, when I gather more information, the whole thing changes. So.
All right.
From mundane to spiritual mind. The causal body is little developed in the majority at the present stage of evolution, as it remains unaffected by the mental activities directed to external objects. It is, in fact, the organ for abstract thought. The seat of self-consciousness is moved from the lower mind to the higher mind by strenuous thinking, by the intellectual travail of the student, the philosopher, the man of science. If the latter turns his thoughts from objects to principles, from phenomena to laws. Annie Besant.
So in the Theosophical view, there is this idea of two aspects of the mind, the spiritual or abstract and the concrete or material mind. The causal body is a technical name for the vehicle of expression of the higher mind. And as Annie Besant says there, the lower mind is the one that can understand concrete things. The abstract things can only be understood by the higher mind. And the way to stimulate the higher mind is by trying to understand abstract things. If your mind is constantly on concrete things, you never awake the higher mind. The higher mind is awakened by the effort to understand things of universal value, things of an abstract value. Some people would ask, why should I study something like the Secret Doctrine? That is not practical, that is so far out there, how does it help me to live my life? But the way that it helps is in a very deep way, because it is through that effort that we awaken the higher mind, which then is available in our everyday life. It is perhaps the only moment in our life when we try to study these subjects that we are making an effort to awaken this mind. In the rest of the day, we may be constantly involved in things that are only stimulating the lower mind. So we need to realize that the study of abstract things, if it is done in this way that we are talking, and not just in the way of trying to memorize concepts about universal things, if we are trying to work with the concepts, it's the most practical thing we can do, and it will bring far deeper results than being constantly putting our mind on superficial or concrete things.
The very genius of metaphysical and spiritual occultism forbids the use of figures or even symbols further than as temporary aids. Once define an idea in words, and it loses its reality. Once figure a metaphysical idea, and you materialize its spirit. Let the esotericists, therefore, be very careful to spiritualize the instructions and avoid materializing them. Let them always try to find the highest meaning possible, confident that in proportion as they approach the material and visible in their speculations on the instructions, so far are they from the right understanding of them. HPB.
So here again, the idea for the teachings is to pull us to this abstract mind. So when we are studying, there is a double movement that we have to do. What Michelle mentioned, the idea of drawing diagrams, trying to think of an example, you are trying to take those teachings down to your understanding, and that is important, and it's a first step. As Blavatsky says, the diagrams and figures and all these things are means, but they are not the aim. They are means to set our foot on a concept so that then we can try to go to the essence of that concept. So whenever there is a teaching that is quite abstract, first we may try to make it more concrete so that our mind can grasp and stand on that concept. But then we should try to understand that concept in the most spiritual and abstract possible way for us. What does it mean? For example, if we say the universal self is our true nature, that is a very deep concept. We can take it in words, it seems simple, but then pause and then try to see what that really means. That myself, that I feel to be myself, is universal. And try to perceive that in the most spiritual or abstract way. You may not be able to, or you may be able to go so far, but that very effort of trying to perceive this in the most spiritual way is what is making you awaken your higher nature. So, we can try to draw examples. Well, we can say that the universal self is like the moon, the light of the moon, and it falls into a lake that has ripple, and each little spark in the ripples are the little self of each one of us, and they are just a reflection from the moon, but the light is only one light. So that would be an example that allows us to make a concept. You know, you can say, okay, so these individual selves are reflections of the universal self in each one of our brains. So the one self comes to our brains, each brain, you know, shines, and that shining is the personal self, but they all come from the universal self. That is an example you can make to somehow grasp the concept. But then, try to go beyond that. Try to understand as much as you can what it means that I am the universal self and not this personal self. And just pause, try to contemplate the concept, try to push a little and see if you can see, and then pause. You know, it's a process of really an inquiry, a meditative inquiry. And that's what the purpose of the true Theosophical study is.
Beyond intellect. If one imagines that one is going to get a satisfactory picture of the constitution of the universe from the secret doctrine, one will get only confusion from its study. It is not meant to give any such final verdict on existence, but to lead towards the truth. Truth lies beyond any ideas we can formulate or express. Exoteric instructions are all very well so long as they are taken as pointers for beginners and not accepted by them as anything more. HPB.
So here again, what the model says, truth will always be higher than any teaching. The teaching in the secret doctrine, the teaching in Buddhism, the teaching anywhere. Truth is always beyond any formulation in words, because any formulation is limited. If you want to describe what love is to a person from another planet that has no idea what love is, how much do you have to say to cover all the different aspects, and yet you would not be able to convey the feeling of love to this person? And if that person interviews different people, and different people talk about different aspects, he would say they are all contradicting themselves. One of them has to have the truth, the other are wrong, and then, you know, he would identify with one explanation and say this is the only truth, and that is what we do with religions. Any formulation, theosophical or non-theosophical, is limited. It's showing one aspect of the truth. And it may be useful, it's not that it's not useful, but the truth is always higher than any religion, than any teaching. So what Blavatsky is trying to do with all the true theosophical teachers is use the concepts to go beyond the concepts, to go to a direct perception.
But all books Theosophy regards, on account of the human element contained in them, as inferior to the book of nature. To read which and comprehend it correctly, the innate powers of the soul must be highly developed. Ideal laws can be perceived by the intuitive faculty alone. They are beyond the domain of argument and dialectics, and no one can understand or rightly appreciate them through the explanations of another mind, though even this mind be claiming a direct revelation. HPB.
So even if the Buddha comes and tells you the truth, that doesn't mean that you will get the truth. This is why Krishnamurti used to say, a truth repeated is a lie. It's a lie in the sense that it's not the truth. Somebody can repeat the truth if that person has a direct perception of it. But the repetition itself, the truth cannot be transferred. All that can be transferred is a concept, not the perception. Now the concept may be a finger pointing to wherever you have to look. And then when you look and when you see the truth. But the truth is not in the concept. Now that doesn't mean the concept is useless. When Blavatsky says the truth cannot be perceived by the mind, that doesn't mean you don't have to use your mind at all. That means you have to go beyond the mind. Use the mind, take the mind to wherever it can take you, and don't be contented there, go beyond. This is in the idea, there is a story with the Buddha, or the Buddha says, if you use a boat to get to the other shore, you get to the other shore and you don't grab the boat and start walking on land with the boat on your shoulders. The boat was important to get you there, and then you leave behind the boat. Without the boat, you couldn't get to the other shore. But the actual walking on the other shore, it doesn't imply the boat. So the same with the knowledge. The study can take you to the other shore, but if you don't jump out of the boat, out of the realm of mind and concepts, you will never be actually in the other shore. So study is a means, but has to be transcended.
Study of life and of oneself. Regard earnestly all the life that surrounds you. Learn to look intelligently into the hearts of men from an absolutely impersonal point of view. Otherwise, your sight is colored. Therefore, impersonality must first be understood. Intelligence is impartial. No man is your enemy, no man is your friend. All alike are your teachers. Your enemy becomes a mystery that must be solved, even though it takes ages, for man must be understood. Your friend becomes a part of yourself, an extension of yourself, a riddle hard to read. Light on the path.
So this is the other dimension of study that is not limited to books, but the study of life and of ourselves. As Light on the Path says there, we should live in a way in which we are always trying to learn from life, from the experiences, from relationships, from things that happen, from life itself. Now, in order to learn from life, we have to learn to look at things in an impersonal way. Because when we try to understand life from a personal perspective, we are trying to understand life conditioned by what makes us feel good, what makes us feel bad, conditioned by our desires. So our understanding of life is tainted. When there is a difficult situation, if we truly are going to understand that, we have to be able to see things in a more impersonal way. Stop blaming other people, stop blaming the circumstances. So Light on the Path says impersonality has to be understood first. Before we can truly learn from life, we have to understand how it is to perceive life in an impersonal way. And it says intelligence, the true intelligence, not the intellectual intelligence, is impersonal. So the part of the yoga of Theosophy is to learn to see things impersonally, and we are going to explore all that. We little by little need to learn to go through life beyond the play of pleasure and pain. I mean, pleasure and pain will always be there, but to learn to come to this state of consciousness that is beyond the two, not in the sense that you don't feel them, but in the sense that your perception and your action are not conditioned by that. There are simple examples of this. Sometimes the right thing to do is not pleasant. So the more we are identified with pleasure and pain, the less we can do the right thing in that circumstance. And the more we are free from the claim or the strength of pleasure and pain, the freer we are, the easier it is for us to do the right action, even if it is unpleasant. Sometimes the right action is also pleasant, but then we don't have a problem with that. But the problem is when the right action is unpleasant. So the idea is that the practice has to lead us to be more and more comfortable in this state of awareness that is beyond the pool of pain and pleasure. And as we learn that impersonality, we begin to be able to learn from life. And the last one.
Regard most earnestly your own heart, for through your own heart comes the one light which can illuminate life and make it clear to your eyes. Not until the bonds of personality are loosed can that profound mystery of self begin to be seen. Not till you stand aside from it will it in any way reveal itself to your understanding. Then, and not till then, can you grasp and guide it. Then, and not till then, can you use all its powers and devote them to a worthy service. Light on the path.
So this part talks about self-knowledge. I'm just mentioning this very briefly because we will devote a whole class to this aspect of learning. But see that light on the path says, regard your own heart, but not until the bonds of the personality are loose, you won't be able to see your own heart and to learn from it in an impersonal way. Again, it's the same kind of concept. Self-knowledge can only come when we learn the right way of looking at things. By right way, I mean this impersonal way. Unless we learn to position ourselves in the right way of or state of awareness, what Krishnamurti, for example, would call this passive awareness. Unless we can position ourselves in that state of consciousness, self-knowledge may become very tricky, may overwhelm the person. If you are looking at yourself from the identification with the personality, it's very difficult to see the what we would call the weakness of the personality. Because there is always, because of this identification, there is the compulsion to justify the personality. Or when we see the weaknesses or the blind spots, then we feel that we are wrong because we think we are the personality, and lack of self-confidence is the result of that. Self-knowledge is not easy, and there is a reason why self-knowledge has been a secret teaching for a long time. I think with the work of Krishnamurti, this idea of self-knowledge became more public, became more evident. This was always taught in small groups, but it is still something that we need to learn how to deal with in the right way. Otherwise, it may have negative effects. So we are going to devote some time to this. So that is it for this subject. Of course, there is far more that, each one of these subjects could take the whole week, but I wanted at least to present the general idea. Is there any question or comments about this?
I was thinking when you mentioned earlier about the new age. In the 1960s, I was librarian of the Cape Town Lodge, and thoughts burst upon us. The work of Teilhard Chardin, who proposed the evolution of consciousness. And we read his books and how he came to that conclusion. And then the works of Martin Buber, is the book, I Am Love, and You Can Do. And then the work of Carl Gustav Jung. It just overwhelmed us, but it was tremendous. And then in our own country, the professor of higher mathematics, Michael Whiteman, talked about the mystical life. And we had all this to deal with, but it was exciting and kind of brought in the new age and all the hippies. And I found it delightful.
Yeah, that is a more serious aspect of the New Age. And in my definition of New Age, I wouldn't even put these authors within the New Age. Now, all these concepts were expressed in the West first by the Theosophical Society. This idea of evolution. Darwin proposed the theory of physical evolution in the 1860s, and in the 1870s, Blavatsky extended the idea of physical evolution to intellectual and spiritual evolution. When I think in the 20s, in 1920, some early members of the society were talking about, there is this concept in Theosophy that at the end of each century, there is a special effort by the masters to help humanity advance in some way. And in the speculations about what would come for 1975, I think it was Fritz Kunz or some of the members that were contemporary of Leadbeater and Besant, one of them said that probably 1975 what was going to come is a democratization of esotericism, by which he meant the spread of esotericism in a way that people who are not really interested in esotericism would have access to these concepts that were esoteric at the moment. And I think that is actually what happened. Today, most people are familiar with these concepts of spiritual evolution and many others, even if they are not particularly spiritual. And the way that they came through to the most of humanity is by means of these authors, which are not, for example, Jung, and this is only my opinion. There are Joy Means, for example, she loved Jung and she had a lot of books by Jung. And in my view, Jung, as a psychologist, was a great spiritual person. As an esotericist, he was quite, I wouldn't even say that he was an esotericist. Now with the Red Book, we know that he was in touch with some entities. He had no clue what these entities could be. He had no clue of what the astral plane or other planes of consciousness that they existed. He thought that this Philemon, that was this entity that he was in touch with, was just a fabrication of his psyche. He had no idea that there can be entities on other planes. So, you see, from an esoteric point of view, he knew almost nothing. From a psychological point of view, he incorporated far more spirituality than any other psychologist. But because he was in between, he could reach the mass of humanity in a way that Theosophy cannot. Theosophy is too much for most people. But there were these figures like Jung and many others that had enough esotericism, but not too much, so that they could communicate it to most humanity. And I think that is what happened. You see that there are these great people like Jung and many others that brought esoteric ideas to the mass of humanity. Nevertheless, the TS has been saying that for decades before and in a far deeper way, but because of that depth, it's not directly accessible, except for those who are interested in that in particular.
As you're very keen on the secret doctrine, if we can just go back to that for a moment, where HBB says that the secret doctrine was not meant to be a great exposition, but was meant to lead towards the truth, I'm reminded of putting that together with your example of love. So an alien coming by wanting to know what we mean by love. And you can give all the descriptions in the world, or anything, it doesn't have to be love. You can give a lot of descriptions, but it won't actually elicit that feeling in the person. So to know what someone's talking about, you actually have to have had that feeling yourself, or that experience yourself. And I think that where HBB says, lead towards the truth, it really means lead towards the experience. So she's writing about all this stuff in the secret doctrine and elsewhere, and what she wants is to help lead people towards the actual experience of pure being, so.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's what she means, and there is this magic in what we call attention or awareness, where wherever we put our attention, we begin to be connected to that. I think it is in the Bhagavad Gita, it's a scripture in Hinduism that Krishna says, whatever you are meditating on, or maybe in one of the Upanishads, whatever you are meditating on, you become that. Therefore, put your mind on me and constantly think of me. So, what I think the teachings are doing is drawing our attention to a certain realm of the universe that if we keep our attention there and we do it in the right way, and by that I mean if we put our attention there and try to go there instead of bringing that to the intellectual realm, then because we have that intrinsic ability to perceive or to become anything that we are paying attention to, then we can perceive truth. So the words are a means to direct our attention in towards realms that then we can perceive in a direct way, in direct perception. So this is why I think the teachings are very important, because without the teachings, we would not be paying attention to these things. But what is important is where we go by paying attention, by making an effort to perceive. So we end up using the teachings to go beyond them and to actually have our own direct perception of these things. And I think that's what HPV was trying to do in her writings. Any other comments or questions? All right, so we can stop here. You have?
Yes, no, we can stop here.
Yeah.